to
Aha.
I've been trying to find a solution or a facilitation to make the job market more accessible for underrepresented groups, because we have many recruitment solutions that are providing more equitable solutions, and we have onboarding processes that are also offering more diversity and inclusivity. But I think one of the main issues are still what happens up until you reach to that step. So I have been thinking, okay, is there a way to make this process maybe easier for HRs or recruiters or headhunters, talent acquisition people, so that I can help those highly skilled professionals who are having challenges to access jobs? Because Netherlands context specific, we know that there are available open vacancies, and we know that there are highly skilled professionals, but we also know that there is a mismatch. And there is at one hand unemployment, and at the other hand, hiring managers are not having access to talent. So I'm thinking about how to bridge this gap, and ideally through some sort of technological enablement.
Well, that sounds like a great start, Ekan. Do for the wise crowds, what clarifying questions come up for us? What would we like to know more about?
Could you speak a little bit more to the technological component? Is that like a design constraint that you're working with, or do you have specific reasons for why that would be where the solution lies?
So from the job seekers side, I have been observing that some candidates indeed lack the skill how to represent themselves better and their skills. But at the same time, we know that there are tons of resources on the web where people can have access to and learn. But for some reason, that is also not happening. So the technological side, one was, okay, maybe there is an access problem again there. Is there a way to maybe curate that information in a better way so it's more kind of attractive for people to go in and explore that? I think that's one part.
Can I ask, what technology are you using to actually shortlist people? So who is actually going through applications to decide that somebody might not be skilled enough? Are these people, or is this a technological platform?
So I myself at the moment I'm not using any platform, but I know that there are lots of ATS platforms where candidates are being scanned through their CVs. And depending on how they match to that system, they can be eliminated before even a human eye looks at their CVs. Another one is well, actually, yeah, I think that's that's the answer I have only at this moment.
I'm wondering what makes this particular challenge around the gap between skilled workers and the marketplace, what makes it significant for you? Why does this matter from your personal motivation and perspective?
Well, first of all, it also is based on my personal experience going through it. Having interviewed for many roles, but then not landing on them is one thing. And the second is me having lots of people around me whom I know that they have really good CVs and they are experienced, and yet they're not able to find a job. And
That-
sometimes, oh, sorry. And
No,
sometimes
no,
this is related with, let's say, the types of legal documents you have or types of conditions that you have. But sometimes it just does not have anything visibly that why you're not landing on a job. Sorry, yeah.
I'm sorry, I really don't understand the problem. So am I correct? So you're interested in people that have competencies or skills, but that don't know how to sell them to
No, I'm saying, even though, well, so for some people, yes, we have people who are looking for jobs and they don't know how to properly present themselves and their skills, but that is solvable.
yeah.
And we have people who pass through the step, they have their CVs and they can represent themselves well, and yet even though that they're matching, even though they're having interviews, they're not landing on a job. So, and at the same time, we know that the market needs highly skilled professionals. We know that there are open vacancies. So my question, how can I, and we know that there's a mismatch. So my question is, how can I bridge that gap? So the job seekers for highly professionals, highly skilled professionals can be matched with those jobs.
So you think that those people that have those skills match in other words, you think that the demand match the offer?
Well, so majority of these people are already, I'm talking for the Netherlands context, majority of these people are here already within the country. So then my assumption is that if they were not matching, they wouldn't be invited to the country, so to say, in the first place. And some of them did work at certain jobs, but then they got unemployed and they're struggling to find a job for long times.
Do you have any data on this in terms of the demand in the market, or maybe not data, but just like specifics as to where the mismatch lies?
So I know I have information in terms of the needs. I know that within the Netherlands, there's a need for IT sector. There's a need for specific business services like finance, administration, accountant, etc. I know that there is a need for construction workers or more specific, let's say, kind of like, for example, beauticians, etc. And I also know that there is a gap for hospitality sector. But I also know that for the hospitality sector, most of the workers are students, and because of their fast, let's say they're getting employed fast, and then they're leaving the jobs fast because it's temporary. But also, I would say for highly skilled professionals, hospitality sector is probably not the target that they're looking for. Yeah, I think those are the the facts that I have. And for going back to maybe the technology question again, I believe one of the scarce resources we have is time. So my thinking is that if I can make things faster through technology, then maybe that makes it attractive for people because I can sell time to them somehow.
Have you got any data of why people are, even though they are getting invited to an interview, the data why they are not selected for the job?
I have made a qualitative survey, and in that survey, I have received answers that language being one of the main barriers, that they would be expected to speak Dutch, and unfortunately they would not know. But then my thinking was that, okay, even if you are, as a job seeker, learning the language of the country that you are seeking a job in, you're not going to get as proficient as like enough to do your professional work. So then how do you overcome that that need? But one of the recent, for example, good practices that I learned about was one of the Dutch companies hired a translator during an onboarding of a non-Dutch worker, which was helpful for the initial onboarding. But then again, if you're not very I guess it's a learning curve. Okay, the person would still learn, but they would still need to function in English for a while, probably.
And just to check my understanding, so it sounds like you have identified a sort of problem space around the gap between skills / labor and demand in the labor market. And it sounds like the solution that you hope to provide is not super defined. It sounds like you're still trying to figure that out.
True.
Okay. And then in terms of the participants with regards to the systems, it seems like you're identifying both job seekers and those seeking labor. Is there anybody else in that sort of stakeholder map or constellation that might be relevant towards probing your solution space?
I would say probably the the migration office, because when you have people who cannot maintain their legal status, which is mostly related with being employed in here, then you also have additional workload for like governmental offices who needs to assess these people and then issue papers accordingly or tell them to leave the country accordingly. So there's that administration work. And then, of course, you have the whole mental health part of it, which is probably adding more workload to health services. Yeah, I think these are the two. And maybe for the employment agency, because then they would also have higher unemployment rates. So it's an increase in statistics.
I have one last question, and I know, Jeremy, you probably want to move to the other side. What data or qualitative interviews have you done with recruiters Like, what have you heard coming from them as to why there's the mismatch?
I think I'm still in the process for this, so I haven't made a comprehensive research about this yet. But a feedback that I heard was, again, the language issue, that people do expect for, again, Netherlands context to speak the Dutch language. Yeah, and another one was, again, how to represent yourself. Yeah, those were the two.
All right, Ekin. It sounds like we have got some information. Um, if I had to ask you to put the one thing what is it that we could offer you that would be really high value at this point? What might help you unlock your way forward?
Good question. Well, at the moment, I am trying to have more conversations with recruiters. So probably another alternative step other than this could be helpful.
Sorry, what is the thing that you've already are doing?
I am having conversations with recruiters or people who are at the position of hiring to hear from their side. So another step that is another option apart from that would be helpful.
All right, Ekin, I think we have some information. We're going to have a conversation and see what it is. So go ahead and turn off your webcam, mute yourself, and we will chop it up. And we'll see what the Wise Crowds has to offer.
So I think this is an incredibly complex situation, and much more complex than you describe it. Because I think there are human beings involved here, and there are cultural differences involved here. So one question for me would be, when people say how to present yourself in an interview, what does that actually mean? Right? Is that speaking? Is that language? Is that understanding that the other culture, so that you potentially understand why somebody responds in a particular way? So there are cultures who are much more hierarchical and patriarchal than the culture where you would want to live in and apply for a job. So you might want much more direction than a recruiter might want to give you, because they are very agile, for example. So I think that understanding about the cultures and the cultures within, not only in the country where you're living and how that differs from your own, but also the culture of the organization and what that organization actually would want from you is a side that might be potentially really interesting to explore, to understand that side of the hiring process and asking questions in interviews, for example. So I'm not necessarily sure that a technological solution is the solution. It might be part of that, but the question is as well, what kind of questions are being asked in the interview, which might be revealing. And are they very conventional questions, the typical, what happens, what will people say when you leave the room, what will they say about you? Or are they actually much more interesting questions in terms of what are your values? Are we looking for values, or are we looking for skills? Skills can be trained. And I've seen a lot of organizations who have hired people who don't speak the language and have offered language training for them and the patience for people to actually learn the language. So yes, language is a reason, but if you're really skilled, organizations are willing to potentially pay for the training and have the patience to support you with that. So yeah, as I say, I think it's a pretty complex situation you're facing there. I don't know whether that's helpful.
Well, so what is your recommendation?
To look at cultural differences as well and to understand not only the organization and the culture of the organization that's hiring, but also the culture in the country and their so the cultural differences, and potentially there's some awareness raising in there. So one side is understanding it, and the other side is how are recruiters aware of those cultural differences, and is there some sort of awareness raising campaign needed?
When I think about like offering services into this challenge, I think there's the I definitely do agree with you, Annika, in that this is a sticky freaking widget, right? Because if you think about the amount of economic resources that have an interest in this gap already being bridged, that there's an entire industries of people in terms of like recruiting and headhunting that are offering services to attempt to solve this problem, and some of those are actually very labor intense, and yet there's still profitable ventures to be had in that space. One of the questions that comes up for me is like the challenge around, she said that she's doing interviews for recruiters, and while I think that's yes, definitely, I think they're, in terms of having a service that is they would be willing to pay for, I think that's where the resources are. So that's where the client tends to be. And there's something about the recognition of that. If they knew the problem well, then there would be, I mean, there is something being done into that problem space, basically. And I'm very curious to do some form of like audit of like, hey, what are you doing to solve the problem that you already have? And on the basis of what about those solutions is working in order to identify something into the gap. And when I think about how, especially from the perspective of what liberating structures might be able to do, then I'm sort of I land on the process of inquiry into those questions. So that has something to do with like, what are the success stories? How are you getting them? And, that you want more of, on the appreciative interview side. There's also an interesting, I think, line of inquiry around like where are the sticky widgets and dumpster fires that are painful for you? Well, what I would be concerned about is that people don't have a whole lot of interest to entertain an interview in the absence of some form of solution. And there's a bit of a chicken or an egg thing here. It's like, in order to get people's time, like some solution seems to be important, like, and yet I don't want to come like, hey, what do you guys think of my solution? Because then you're just into the territory of a sales call. And so one piece of information that jumps up as relevant is around the mom test and how we might be able to get clean feedback and information from folks. And I just think about how I might be able to offer just a relatively limited subset of questions that could guide the inquiry in pro-social directions. Anybody else?
Oh, an idea that I have is I'm thinking of the role of the agent for writers and actors. And I'm thinking, well, maybe a way to do that is to build is to build a company around that. In other words, I become the agents of these people. Okay, so so if I really want to make a difference, that there's got to be some skin in the game. It cannot be just information. It cannot be, I think, just rely on what exists, especially not in terms of HR and recruiting, which is a hellhole anyway, and which is absolutely partial, and the only way you can deal with it is to play with the algorithms, and that don't get you anywhere really, does it? So that would be my 2 cents. Like, why don't, like Anna-Catherine said about culture. So what are the real advantages? What are the real thing that I could, as an agent for these people, actually develop and evangelize, so that there is. So I am part of a trigger that doesn't exist in some companies now, but that could exist eventually. Well, that's it. Anybody else?
Yeah, I guess what's sort of jumping out to me is 2 bits. One bit is still sort of obsessed with this catalog of questions, and I've got this list right here in front of me that I'm sort of putting together, and I think one of the questions that I think is the most interesting is, what type of candidate is your ideal candidate, right? The invitation into rich descriptive metaphor, I think, is an interesting space to sort of mine and get more information about. I think that's going to be specific to roles and specific to industries and organizations. So I think that's a very wide space, unfortunately. But when I think about the problem and what's essential towards the problem, what jumps out to me is around risk. That if I am a recruiter, if I am in the role of HR, like recruiting the quote unquote wrong person is quite a risky proposition. It costs me a lot of money to onboard people, and time and opportunity. And I'm just wondering what the solution space could possibly be to reduce that risk. And I think ultimately that's going to come down to dollars and cents thing. Like, what's the way in which we might be able to discount that risk to make it like, if I can shrink that risk down to only this, then I might take a chance on somebody who doesn't have my cultural identity, or doesn't who might have a different way of doing things that might be dissonant in the context. So there's something around like, what are potentially innovative solutions that might be able to limit the risk of having someone who is less than perfect in a role. So that's what's alive for me now. Anybody else?
I missed all of that, I'm afraid. So I'll put the thoughts that I had, and forgive me if I'm repeating. But something that occurred to me is, it almost seems like there's multiple problems here. And some of them are very different, right? Because there's the problem of what sounds like just the mismatch, right? So you apply for a job and maybe it doesn't tell you that Dutch is a requirement, so you end up wasting your time. You get to the interview and you don't get the job. That's one thing, which is why I was asking about the recruiters. Maybe there's some fixing that needs to happen there. But then also there's the discoverability, and I'm not sure if it's because I'm misunderstanding like the problem space, but discoverability is very different from I apply and then I don't get the job, right? There's this question of, well, how do I know where I'm applying to in the first place? And the reason why I asked that question on technological solutions is, this is one of those bogus statistics people throw around, but I think it's true. 80% of jobs you get through networking. And maybe it's industry specific, but so it is the solution that we need to have greater technological access, or is it maybe about curating spaces where the right people can meet each other? Because we also know that's a highly effective way of finding employment. So I don't know, but those seem like very different problems.
I think we lost Jeremy.
I
Just
think
realized that as well.
But maybe in the meantime, Rebecca, thank you for highlighting that. But can I ask you to maybe elaborate on it a bit more? Because
Yeah,
maybe that's also the issue, for, like framing
No,
the question more.
Wise Crowd is not like that. Wise Crowd is when we finish, you come back and then you can talk. Otherwise,
Okay, sorry.
and I know that Ekin is listening to us, so we are consulting. Jeremy, maybe you can step in here.
Yeah, I would at this point invite Aiken to come back and tell us what she thinks of our conversation, and take it from there.
Well, thank you very much for spending time and energy on this complex question. And it made me think, like, I think mainly two things. One is, yeah, looking at the cultural side, but looking at the cultural side from the kind of hiring part of the things, like how does the HR and the recruiters are looking into this from that cultural perspective is one thing that made me think. And the second one was, yeah, maybe I should also be reframing the question a bit differently, because yeah, discoverability versus making applications is different. And then I broke the rules of the game and I asked Rebecca if she can elaborate a bit more when you were out of the call, Jeremy.
Shall I? Okay, so again, I really did miss most of the conversation, but when I was listening to you describing the problem, Ekin, it seemed like very broadly there's just this issue of how do we get people into the jobs that are available, right? And I know that it's a specific demographic that you're going after, and you've spoken a little bit more to what's going wrong at the recruiting stage. So maybe the transparency of what the requirements are, if there are language requirements, and I know that you're still getting information from recruiters. So there's a chunk of information that we don't know, but we might have some ideas about what it might be. The question that I had, which I saw as a very different problem, was everything that's happening before you even get to the recruiting. So everything that's happening before you even getting to the application stage. And I might have missed this. I'm not sure if you've decided that's not what you're targeting right now. But if you are also interested in that part of the pipeline, I think that's very different from trying to help people once they've already found it, right? So it's the question of,
That's actually where I'm focusing on, because I think that's the problem.
which part of that pipeline? Because I think that
before you even get to the recruitment, because like, yeah, getting there is the issue.
Okay. That's very helpful. That's okay. Good to know.
but didn't you say that these people have the opportunity? They pass the first hurdle.
No, it's access to that. Like, I
Okay.
said, yes, we do have recruitment practices. For example, I learned that there is a practice where there's an assessment, like gamified assessment tool, for example. instead of just using interviews, they're using games to assess people's skills, which is very good. But still, up until you get there, how do you get there?
Hmm.
Which
Well-
then maybe goes to discoverability question.
Yeah, because then the next question that I'd have, and maybe you asked for like what would be the next steps from here. The thing that seems most obvious to me is really targeting people who are at that stage. So it sounds like you've spoken to people that have made it into the recruiting and maybe didn't get the job, but I would speak to people that are literally just starting their job search, you know, and perhaps you've already done this, and asking questions like, well, you know, are you going onto Google, or are you speaking to friends? Like, that's the whole world of things that they might be doing, really trying to understand that, and then potentially doing the same with the recruiters, right? So if you're about to speak to them, maybe the questions are less about, you know, how do you do the job descriptions and things like that, but more about in your own HR pipeline, where's the first exposure that you have to potential candidates, right? Are you doing events? Are you paying an agency? And then trying to understand between those two sets of data, like what's missing between them.
Hmm.
I would love to take this opportunity to rant slightly at how much I hate the recruitment process. How uninspiring it really is. Just from like it is. You can see everything about the industry of recruitment and the way that organizations recruit is this very linear process of like you go through all of these checks in these stages, and then you know it's really just like a super low tech sales funnel, right? If you get enough applications in, you can just kick people out of that process, and by the time you find the 3 people that get to the end, then you can pick. And how not only uninspired, but it's also like very ill-informed. Like nothing about that. It kind of like it has the space in my belly that is like, we're looking for certainty in in an uncertain world, and nothing, no matter what we do, we still are left with we're still left at the edge of the unknown. Also commodified, uninspiring language. Preach. Exactly. And so there's something I think really interesting when I'm provoked into like thinking. I think like you also brought up, Rebecca, around the like most jobs are found via. So how might that process look in an informal system inspired design process? Not that this is your solution, but I love anyway when we can figure out a way to get ourselves a realistic look of like what are people like, and the observation of them interacting. End rant. Anybody else? So thank you, Ekin. Yeah, hit me. Go for it. Go nuts, guys.
I'm really getting into it. I think the other practical suggestion that I would have is to really kind of use the framework of personas as you're doing this research and the qualitative questions, because a job seeker and a recruiter, these are very broad terms. They can look very different for different people. And I think something that's also important in the questions you ask the job seekers is, what stage of job seeking are they at? Because there's kind of a, this is the first term that comes to mind, but like there is a desperation that sets in when you've been doing something for 8 months versus someone who's just starting fresh and, like looking for something. So those are going to be very different kinds of people. And they're going to find their jobs in very different kinds of way. And so maybe there's like a sort of different dimensions that you might want to measure, right? So there's kind of like desperation for a job. There's definitely a better word for that, but I'm just thinking on the fly here. There is going to be things like, what are you willing to sacrifice in looking for work? Is this really a situation of, I need work now, I need to pay my bills? Or, you know what, actually, I'm a really skilled accountant and I have a lot of years of experience, and I also want to curate a really good fit. So those are good, again, going to be different kinds of people, and I'd imagine are going to have very different experiences of how they look for jobs. And then the same, of course, is true for different kinds of businesses and recruiters.
Well, thank you very much. I have more than enough to proceed in different ways. Appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Ekin, for offering us your question. Anybody else? Do we have another situation, question, or challenge up on the docket?
I just want to say I've got to hop off in about 4 minutes because I have another meeting. So if I disappear, that'll be that reason. And I really enjoyed the process, but I stayed those 4 minutes because I'm really enjoying this.
Thank you.
I have a scenario. Can you guys hear me? So okay, cool. Sorry for not contributing. I joined the meeting late, so I didn't understand, have the context of Ekin's challenge, but I'm sure she has got support. Yes, so my scenario is I'm organizing a summit for educational leaders. And the theme of the summit is how to make learning meaningful. How can we create learning environments that liberate learners to discover new things about their surrounding, about themselves, to explore, to I don't know the right word, but how can we create that kind of enabling learning environment that allows learners to thrive, and as a result, inspire teachers or trainers or educators to love teaching and learners to love learning. So we are having 50 participants, and they are all from African countries, nations. So they're educational leaders. Some of them are teachers in schools. Others, the majority are facilitators at the Social Innovation Academy, where I work. I work with trainers, so I help. I do training seminars to help foster a learner-centered approach toward learning rather than a teacher-centered approach, pedagogy. So how can I use the liberating structures to make this summit powerful? I hope I'm clear. That's my scenario.
By now, we certainly know the next step is clarifying questions.
Yep.
I could maybe go. Could you please describe a bit more about the participants of this summit?
Yeah, so the participants are trainers. They're from the organization I work with. We do entrepreneurship training, social entrepreneurship. So they're trainers. They're also teachers from schools, secondary level schools in Uganda. I come from Uganda. Head teachers, everyone who has a vested interest in learning, education.
And how were they finding this? How were they selected? Did they apply? What brings them there?
Yes, so they apply. So the majority of the participants are from a closed community, the Social Innovation Academy. They are facilitators. So they normally teach programs on entrepreneurship, mindset, change, and all of that, overcoming limiting beliefs. So So these closed members have already gone through some kind of sessions on learner-centered approach. But the aim of this summit is how could we brainstorm on other interesting, creative ways that we could teach to create meaningful learning in the classroom. The other participants are from outside our closed center community. So those are the teachers in the schools who teach the normal syllabus and curriculum in schools, secondary schools. Yeah.
How long is the event going to last?
It's 2 days.
Can you explain a bit more on what do you mean by meaningful learning? Is it like more interactivity? Is it more kind of long-term learning?
Yes, thank you for that question. It's more on interactivity in the classroom, engagement, increasing. How could we create environments, learning environments, where it's not just the teacher doing the talking and the activity, but the learners are also involved. They're also participating in not just in contributions in the class, but even in creation of content, the learning content. How can they be engaged from the whole process of learning, from the time the content is developed to the time it's delivered to the time it's evaluated? How can we set up activities or structures that tap into the knowledge of the learners and just not only focus on the teacher who knows everything, imparting information into empty heads. Empty heads in pots.
Do you have an idea of what it would look like to have the ultimate learning environment?
Some of the liberating structures that I've used so far in the past that have worked, which I envision to also be part of the summit, are open space, World Cafe, Jigsaw, and then Jigsaw Learning. There's also Jigsaw Learning, a very interesting tool of learning, which helps participants to become expert teachers or experts from their own experience, and then engage in teaching each other, peer teaching or peer mentorship. Then there's also the question formulation technique, which is it's a method for using questions to teach, but the questions are generated by the learners more, not the instructor. Those have been a few of them that have really worked in the past from the TOTs I've been doing. Yeah, but how could we make it more powerful? How could we make the experience richer, given the diversity that's coming to the summit? How could we? Yeah, I'm curious. See that. Yeah.
Which one do you think is more important for your audience? Is it inspiration and kind of learning about different ways of learning, or is it practical things they can go and implement in their classrooms?
It's both in a way, but the most important is practical things that they can go and implement in the classrooms. Yeah.
All right, so my quick checksum. So our contact is going to be at a summit that's happening at the Social Innovation Academy. the purpose or the theme of the summit is around meaningful learning, and meaning seems to be equivalent to engaging. The participants that were it seems like two different subgroups. One group of participants that are sort of local to the Social Innovation Academy, and then a sort of external group of participants that are your more traditional teachers and educators. And in terms of the parameters, you said we've got 2 days. And I'm also going to check. I would imagine that these participants also don't have they probably don't have a relationship before they show up there. Okay. All right. Cool. I think I know enough to be dangerous. So with that, James, mute yourself and turn off your webcam, and importantly, listen while we chop it up for you. So we have a little bit of a tricky question because we're looking for practical tools and whatnot. And so while liberating structures are relevant, I'm also curious to know, when you think about this sort of this ask, what type of stuff comes up for you now?
The first thing comes to my mind is, most of the time when the topic is innovation and entrepreneurship, I think the experts assume what entrepreneurs or innovators need to know, but everybody's entrepreneurship journey is very different. So I think these teachers, depending on what kind of entrepreneurs or impact makers they're working with, the questions that they need to answer and the interactions that they need to have will differ. And I also think working with a student audience versus working with a more non-traditional audience will require different ways of doing things. Because maybe when you're in a classroom, it's more limited. But when you're working with just, let's say, different types of professionals, it's different. And for some reason, one of the ways that comes to my mind is taking the summit out of that boring room and maybe bringing it into nature, where people can be more free in terms of body, so maybe they're more free in terms of their mind to think together.
I have a few things that come to my mind in terms of structure. We can talk about that later, but thinking about it, I was thinking, like, why not just do a lot of things that are concerning art, and nothing like what you would usually imagine when you're into innovation, social innovation, and all this. You do a lot of activities around art, and how you are how do you say, exercising, some kind of trust in abstract things that will give you, hopefully, ideas to connect. In other words, to go indirectly instead of facing the problem like if it was a problem or if it was a theme. You turn around it and you say, well, what? And you're spending some time making artifacts or talking about art in one way or another.
Yeah, I think that it's one of these like classic examples where you get a bunch of adults in a room together to try and do things differently, but you use the exact same kind of thinking that is prevalent through why most learning isn't meaningful and is very boring. And so I completely agree. I was going to say, like, it needs to be experiential. It cannot be a situation of someone talking to other people. There might be an element of that, but I would say that the primary sort of medium of collaboration. It needs to be participatory. It needs to be embodied. Like you have to get out of your head. And yeah, ideally in nature with art. But I don't know what the constraints are. That might not be possible, but at least the kind of use of body and the use of space. So, you know, if you're in a room, instead of having all the chairs facing a speaker, maybe it's a circle, or maybe there's a point in some activity where you're asking people to get up and physically change where they are. So, but these are like very small kind of like features of sessions that are designed. And I think that one thing I'm realizing here is I don't know the organization that he's working with, but they need to be very intentional and have to have some really good facilitation to make this work well.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it could be write a play or something, write a play and just act it. You know, that's it.
Write a play about the classroom experience of your dreams and then act it.
You know, there's a nice LS structure for that, right? So anything that has to do with improvisation can be introduced at one point. So you would have the body, but then again, the idea to write a script or something like that, or a play, or a series of little scenes, you know, like different groups write little scenes about, it could be about teaching, about learning, about getting stuck, or various other things that basically will help get you a variety of things, and that can indirectly influence the way you want to teach or whatever.
I like the play because the other thing I was going to say earlier is it felt like there would need to be a lot of grounding around empathy. It didn't sound like there'd be students there. I was very skeptical of things where teachers get together and talk about how things ought to be. But if there is a play, part of that is you have to embody being a student. And so you kind of have to get into the mind. And I think that could be a nice activity where you sort of do both.
Well, invite kids.
Yeah. Do a play with the kids.
Oh, hold on. Let's not get too crazy here. So there, I definitely +5 the suggestion for improv prototyping. So a couple things come to mind. So one is a whole sort of frame around education that is very challenging to sort of copy and paste, but I would love to inspire into the design space for James, and that is around the agile learning centers. Agile learning centers are often community and quite self-organizing learning contexts. And they offer a collection of tools that I think would be very interesting to experiment with in this context. One of them is, for example, a reverse Kanban, where that looks like, how do I describe a reverse Kanban? A reverse Kanban basically tracks choices and starts with choices that we have to make, choices that we have are in process of making, but importantly, it keeps track of choices, and this could also be around content. It keeps track of choices that were made previously, which is often a missing ingredient, because we make a choice and then we just fucking go with it. And then it's very challenging to sort of look back and go, oh, how is that choice that we made previously actually performing in the real world, and reevaluate. So Agile Learning Centers, Google that shit, check it out. Very cool stuff. One of the things that I think I put in a link or a file that has a program that I use for Agile trainings. And that basically just sets up a backlog of questions that people want help with and want to answer, and then uses a whole bunch of different liberating structures effectively to help the group answer those questions. So to both populate the questions, for example, to make it a little bit tangible for those that don't have access on the internet with the doc, we start with something that is as simple as defining our whys with our 9 whys, and then really using a structure that could be as simple as 1, 2, for all to generate our list of topics that are the questions and subject matter that we want to identify. And then, long story short, using tools like Wise Crowds, like Troika Consulting, like the Discovery Action Dialogue to run smaller case clinics in smaller groups, and also to socialize solutions that already exist and are performing better than average around this particular challenge. One of the things that also is very interesting from a structural perspective that I would really say is you can either go like the appreciative interview route. What are stories of success where we saw lots of engagement that we want more of, and how do we get more of those, generally speaking, right? I think that is a vibe that I'm sure James is very familiar with, going with the strengths-based approach. But then the flip side, I think, is also very interesting, really thinking about from the perspective of Triz, and that is how would we make the least engaging learning environment possible? And then, sort of working through that laundry list of like, ooh, what are the sins that we actually commit of that theoretical list? And how do we stop doing those things, more importantly? And that can be both quit doing that shit, but of course, like, here is an alternative practice to satisfy that need more effectively, is an interesting design space. So that would be the liberating structure. Triz is a really great one in that example. But generally speaking, I think the vibe is most importantly for me, 2 things. Build a container of relationality and trust so that people can surface their requests, because I need to have some sense of security that I'm amongst peers and that it's us for us. Second thing would be generate the list of questions and topics with the people that are in the room, rather than saying, hey, this is what we're going to teach you, but really just go, what the fuck do you guys need in order to make your life a little bit easier? And then the third thing is really focusing on the embedded knowledge of practice that's in the room to surface the answer to those questions. And that can require quite some doing, but it really looks much less like, let me tell you guys how it's going to be in terms of solution, and really providing a podium for people that have better than normal solutions to share that information with the group, and also elevate their status, right? Hey, you got a good solution going, let people know, and, take on the role, a role of significance amongst your peers. One thing though, that I would for goddamn sure do across the entirety of this 2 days. So say we're going to follow this happy flow where we build a lot of trust and we get a bunch of questions and we surface all of these different solutions that exist in the community, and we help put those things together, is every tool that I use, every structure, every step along the way, I want to debrief robustly. I want to trigger the metacognition of the people that are in this participatory container and go, hey, did you see this thing we just did? Right? We just did this thing. What did that thing that we do just make possible? How did it work? And where might you be able to use that thing in your context? Where's the application for this stuff? Just to ensure that as I'm using these participatory tools, I am not just giving people the benefit of answering the questions, but that we're also embedding the knowledge of, hey, this is how we actively engage participation from folks. And these are the tools that you're learning. It's even though the learning of those tools doesn't seem like our primary goal here, it actually is a big bonus that you're getting. And I just want to make sure that that's like doubled, like extra bold, italicized, and, and underscored at the same time for people. So that's what comes alive for me. Anybody else?
Well, one I want to come back to improvisation and the embodiment of this. I think that's an interesting thing to do as well, not just to go around and about thinking. I want to come back to this thing about going outside necessarily the mind and the rationality and the logic and whatever it is that you can weave together by answering questions, for example. And there's another structure that comes to my mind is eco-cycle. And you can do that in various ways. You can have a first eco-cycle about what needs to be done if you want for learning. What do you have to get to leave aside? What wants to be born? What kind of new things you think are being on the horizon of learning, things that are mature, that work, that you want to keep, and things like that. And you can then, if you do an eco-cycle at the beginning and an eco-cycle at the end, you have now you have something now to look at and to reflect on and meditate on. So that would be mine.
Well, with that, thank you, Philip. James, come on back and tell us what you take away from this conversation.
Wow, guys, I've just been scribbling, writing amazing ideas. I love the idea of having a session outdoor. Actually, the interesting thing is that where the training is going to be, it's just next to a beautiful site of rocks. So we'll have a session at the rocks. Then I love the idea of a play where the swap of roles, the teacher becomes the student becomes the teacher. And I'm thinking about this role play around two questions. What was the most interesting and exciting session I've ever been a part of? And what was the most boring I've ever been a part of? So those are acted out, and then a debrief is done. Thank you so much for this website. I think I really need to look through this website. It really connects a lot to the core of the work I do. Like, this is me. This is the real me. I need to get time to read through, and if I have questions, I'll get back to you, but I don't have your email addresses apart from Jeremy. But this is awesome. This is awesome. Yeah, so those are my main takeaways. I'm excited about the summit now. I can't wait to do it. Thank you, guys.
Awesome, James. Glad to help. Well, nerds, this has been what in God's name is the date? The 13th of November edition of this Wise Crowds Clinic. My name's Jeremy. You are the Wise Crowd. Thanks everybody for your time, attention, and energy participating. And we're going to do the damn thing next week. So we would love to see you there. And James, come back and let us know how when is this summit going to take place?
You're on mute.
In like a week's time, I'll share with you the pictures of the rock sessions, the sessions at the rock.
Cool. Yeah, we would love to have you come back and debrief what you ended up doing, and how you might do it different the next time. So, well, my name's Jeremy, nerds. That's it. I'm gonna go pick up the kids. I'll see you all next week.
Thanks all.
Bye.
Safe travels.